Hi, my name is Morten from flipnormals.com, and in this tutorial I'm going to walk you through some techniques for creating a stylized environment inside of Maya. And here's the final picture we'll be creating. We'll be using a lot of animation deformers for creating this picture, and we'll also be using the transform component and a lot of hardening edges and reducing geometry to get some interesting shapes. And with that, let's get started. I'll be using Vray for rendering, but you could feasibly use any render engine for this. So this tutorial is more about sort of different techniques, not focusing so much on like specific values and numbers, but like more on experimentation. And the first thing I'll do is I'm creating a ground plane, and I'll give this fairly high subdivs just so I can break it up geometry wise afterwards. I'll show you that in a little bit. But first of all, I'll start up with the sculpting tool. And the sculpting tool inside of Maya, you can sort of, it's kind of like in ZBrush or Sculptress, you can push and pull on geometry. Default, you push it down, and if you hold down Control, you'll pull it back up. And holding down Shift, you can sort of smooth things out afterwards. And if you want to scale up your brush size, you just hold down B. And a really interesting trick inside of Maya, because there's not really any noise deformer. So what I like to do is I select all the vertices and go into the polygon menu. And if you go under Edit Mesh and into Transform Component, under there you'll find this one slider, and set it to 1. 1 is basically 100 in randomness. This assigns like a random seed to each vertex, so you can then move it up and down to get this completely uneven surface. Then I harden the edges by going into object mode and holding down Shift and right click and dragging down to the right corner, and then you'll find harden edges. This will give us this very stylized look. In this tutorial I'll be using my Vray scripts, which is just a bunch of scripts I made for working with Vray faster. The first one I'm using here is a load Vray script, which just loads Vray. The next one just assigns some render settings that I like to use. I'll share the scripts with you in a link so you can download them for yourself. And if you go into the color mapping, I won't take you through all the settings, but just like the most important ones. And in the color mapping, what's important to set is the gamma. You want to raise this. My script does this for me, but if you aren't using the script and you want to do this from scratch, you want to raise the gamma from 1 to 2.2. This basically makes sure that the noise levels in your shadows are correct. And other than that, I have don't affect colors on, and don't affect colors basically makes sure that no color mapping is applied to the final image. This is because we'll do some comping in Photoshop afterwards. Usually I comp inside of Nuke, but I thought for the purpose of this tutorial, just to make it a little more accessible to everyone, we'll just comp inside of Photoshop. And lastly, I have effect swatches on, so I can preview the gamma corrected color in my color swatch directly. And in the indirect illumination tab, I'll adjust it from brute force to irradiance map. This is just because irradiance map is a faster way of rendering when you're rendering still images. And I'll change the preset from high to low, because I don't really, for this like just previewing the images, I don't really need a lot of quality. And also adjust the light catch passes. This is you'll typically set this to the number of cores you have available on your machine. My machine has 24 cores, so I'll set it to 24. And under settings, I'll First of all, it'll adjust the dynamic memory limit. This is just allowing V-Ray to use more virtual memory for rendering, so I don't run out of RAM. And I'll just change the render region to 32 by 32 instead of 64. Depending on your, this is very scene dependent. This can either speed up or slow down your render. Basically, you want to avoid that you have any buckets sort of stuck, and I think most of you know that problem. What you do get out of changing it as well is generally what you say is the lower your render region, the number of your render region is, the slower your render will render, but you also conserve more RAM. So this is really great if you're rendering something at like insane resolutions and you're running out of RAM, then you can try and adjust the render region. And the next thing I'll do is I'll light the scene very very easily. I won't fiddle around with any like area lights or anything. I'm just gonna use the V-Ray sun and the V-Ray sky. And this is this serves this scene pretty well, I think, because I'm just gonna need like one directional light, and this way I don't have to paint a sky afterwards. And all, yeah, it has a very nice feel to it, and because they're linked dynamically, so when I change the position of the sun, it changes the color of the sky as well. So, all right, and this next button in my V-Ray shelf is a V-Ray physical camera. It creates a V-Ray physical camera based on the position of your perspective cam, and it basically just creates a camera, and it goes into the attribute editor and just enables V-Ray physical cam, so you don't have to do that yourself. So let's just see how this looks. The thing I typically do is let's just set the resolution. I want to get a fairly wide image, just because I want to create something like a little sci-fi, and that's cool. So all right, if you go into the camera and under the display options, I usually adjust the gate mask opacity and color just to like blacken out the things that I won't see, so I get a complete image of what my render area is going to be. Let's just adjust it a little bit and see how it looks. Okay, so right now it's very dark, and if you go into the V-Ray camera settings, you can adjust stuff like the f-stop or the f number, your focus and things like that. But I think to begin with, I'll change the focal length, because in this shot I want it really wide and sort of like an epic landscape. And lowering the FOV will also let in more light. So that's also something you have to keep in mind. And I think it's really important when rendering. I think that's the thing I didn't mention, but my render settings also make sure that V-Ray frame buffer is loaded, so you don't have to take care of that yourself. And with the V-Ray frame buffer loaded, you can press on the sRGB preview to see how your final gamma corrected image will look. Now, it might be a little too bright, so let's try a higher F number. Yeah. Let's just adjust. And underneath, under the sun settings, I'll adjust the turbidity and the ozone. The turbidity basically determines how much dust is in the air, like particles and stuff like that. And this will, like a higher value, will make the sky more, give it a more yellowy color. And the same goes for ozone. Like the higher the value, the more, the yellower your light will become. So turbidity changes the sky color, and ozone changes the actual light of like the sun light from the sun. So yeah, it's just there's a lot of experimentation, just changing angles here and there, and kind of getting the emotion or the feel across in the image that I want. And this is another thing that I mentioned previously. Clicking on this specify focus will also change the amount of light that the camera lets in. This is also dependent on where you place the focus distance. Just something to keep in mind. I don't know, I might use this for later if I decide to do some depth of field or something, I don't know yet. And because of the scene, I know I'll be working with sort of like large scale things, so you see I'm going to selecting my perspective camera and going underneath the camera attributes. You see there's the clipping planes. Raising the clipping plane will basically allow the camera to render objects further away. Let's get some interesting things in here. And this is where I really start to experiment. Like I said, there are no really like defined values for this kind of stuff. It's just sort of about making shapes that you think are appealing or that you think look cool. And I'll be playing around a lot with the animation deformers, like twist and bend and flare and stuff. And this is again the transform component under the edit mesh. Gives your objects like an uneven surface. It's really great for this kind of look if you want that sort of. I guess it's a little bit kind of like a paper origami thing to it. So, and you see I placed this in like the wrong direction. So what I'll do is under panels, you can define which view you want to look through. So here I'm going to splitting up the view so so in one view I have my camera and the other one I have the perspective view. And just sort of adjusting it to where I want it to be. I'm going to try and see how it's going to look with a twist deformer. And again, like these values, will just go crazy. Just crank them up as much as you want. See what kind of result you get. And woo, fancy stuff. Like you can really mess around with this stuff a lot and get some really unexpected shapes. But I don't know, I'm not quite happy with the way it's structured inside. So I think I'm going to reduce it a little bit. So if you go into polygons and mesh, there's a reduce feature. And this will basically reduce the amount of polys on your mesh. I don't really want any quads, so I'll take that down to 0 and the sharpness all the way up to 1. Just experiment with these values basically to sort of get the hardness between the edges that you want. And again, the percentage is just how much you want it reduced. And this looks kind of cool. And all these objects I always go in and harden the edges so they get this geometric look. Let's try the twist deformer again. See what it looks like now. Yeah, it doesn't look a lot different, but there's some more variation to the shape now, and I like that. So, another important thing is that when you want to move something with a deformer on it, it's important that you're in that your gizmo is set to world and not local. So if you hold down Shift and Control and right click on your object, it'll give you, depending on which mode you're in, if you're in move, scale, or rotate, it'll allow you to change between local and world and things like that. So get something like the first thing I think about when I look at this, it's sort of like it kind of reminds me of Minas Tirith from Lord of the Rings, kind of. It's also kind of cool. But you can see how different it looks in the perspective view compared to the camera. And this is kind of the thing, you really have to experiment a lot and just sort of go for a shape that you really like. There's a lot of back and forth. And I guess it really comes down to taste. I mean, what you prefer. I want to make a good composition for this picture, so I'm just trying to sort of lead the eye to like a place that it wants to go. Let's create some cool looking planets in the background. I'm just trying to gauge the size of things and see how it works with the composition. See how it works with the previous elements that are already in the scene. Again, not focusing too much on specific values and stuff, because I think that really limits you creatively. It's just about the feel. this thing in the foreground really, like you can see the plane sort of clips my camera. So I get this flat plane in the foreground, and I really don't like that. I should really get rid of that. Looks better. Again, our trusty friend, the transform component tool, will help us make this surface uneven. Harden the edges, see what it looks like. Throw on a twist deformer, really twist this planet to give it a cool look. I'm trying to like the twist, I want the direction to sort of complement the way that it's tilting, so I'll sort of make the tilt go the other way. Just I think that's a more interesting look. And what I'm doing now is I'm duplicating the planet. When you duplicate the planet, you basically sever the connection to the twist deformer, but you keep it in the state you're in, or in the state that the sphere is in, so you won't lose any of your twists once you start moving it, and this is really nice. Okay, and this button is like it's a reflective material I've made with my favorite reflective color. It's just a bright orange that's like completely reflective with Fresnel reflections enabled. I think it's a little too saturated from what I want. I'm gonna try and go for that. See what that looks like. Looks pretty cool. A little too bright. Yeah, I know we get like an annoying sunspot on the planet. I'll just rotate the sun. There we go. You can see it sort of picks up the reflections from the sky, which, you know, is also kind of nice. You're just assigning a new Vray material that's not reflective. Oh, wrong end of view. Just trying to color the cliff a little, just to give it a little bit variation from the ground plane. Oh. And I don't really like the way the plane looks. It's too uniform. So again, the reduce function is just really nice to just break up those really even surfaces. And that looks pretty cool. But the problem is I don't want to reduce the things that I have in the foreground, so I'm just going to extract them. So if you just select the geometry that you want to extract and sort of not be affected by the reduce, you select it in polygon mode, hold down shift, and go down to extract faces. And this way you'll have a piece that's not affected because it's a separate part of geometry. So this way we get some really cool shapes in the distance, but we keep sort of the planes that we established in the beginning in the foreground. And there'll be a lot of cheating in this video, and like I'm brightening up the color just to make it look a little more overblown. So in this will serve as I think I'm gonna make some floating classic sort of like, it's more like fantasy, I guess, like floating rocks, and I'll use the flare deformer for this one. This you can taper the ends of your geo, and it's really cool to actually also move your geometry within your deformers. This way you can get some even more unexpected shapes. Some more transform component, some variation, harden the edges, sort of move it into place where I like the way it looks. And it's really, again, it's about experimenting with the shapes. That looks kind of cool. Yeah, taper it more to have this like pointy floating rock. And I'm not gonna put too much effort into it. I'll actually use this rock for all the rocks. So I'll just duplicate it. Maybe make it a little more pointy. And just basically rotate it around until I get something I'm happy with. And that's another thing in Maya 2014, because they integrated the next tools. We have this really nice soft select. You have the soft selection on the versions of Maya, but it works way better now. So if you select in any mode, edge, vertex, or face mode, select one component and press B, you get this soft select menu up, and you could just hold down B while you scrub from side to side to increase or decrease your radius. And again, there's no point in making new assets where you could just sort of reuse assets that you've already created. And I think this will look kind of cool, scaling it down, moving it close to the camera, trying to get the more irregular shapes in there so we don't just have this like flat plane in the foreground. Oh yeah, and I'm moving the pivot for the object so it's easier to manipulate in the perspective view. If you just hold down D, you'll get a temporary gizmo to move your pivot around. And now I think I'll create something that's gonna be serve more or less as our focal point. Make some cool boxes because boxes are cool. And again, just experiment with some of this. I'm just beveling a vertex, just adjusting the amount of bevel, hardening the edges. And I'll just duplicate it around and stack it on top of itself to create an interesting box shape. And I think I'll apply Vray light material to it and make it sort of sci-fi. So I'll just group these objects. You can group it with Control G or Command G on Mac. Getting the placement right. Again, where does it serve my composition the best? So here I'm selecting a Vray light material, and we're going to do some funky things with this one. This will be a little more advanced, but I'll get to that. So let's just select a general color that we kind of want, like classic cyan. It's a classic sci-fi color. You see the problem here is that because we're using Vray physical camera, it blocks the light from the light material. But if we turn on compensate for camera exposure, it'll light up as if whatever the exposure is, like the f-stop, as if it was 1. So cheating the camera, but cheat as much as you want, really. It's whatever looks the best. So now we'll do a little more advanced shader. We use the sampler info node to basically adjust the color depending on the angle of your object. And just to load these objects into the work area, just make sure your sampler info node is selected and shift select the Vray light material, and then press the button to load the connections. And then we'll need a ramp. The ramp will serve as our way of coloring this. So what we'll do is if you middle mouse drag from one node onto another, you get this node connection editor up, and we'll do that for the sampler info node. Take the facing ratio and put it into the UV chord. Default is V, so I'll just pick V for the V ramp, and we'll middle drag from there into the light material and choose color. So now we've piped the color in, and now our material will respond depending on the angle. So you can see we have a blue, green, and red ramp. So things that face it directly will be blue, and the further they get away, the more red they'll become. So that's a quite specific thing, but now we'll just sort of like now the fun begins, and we'll just experiment with the colors. So again, I like to retain the blue look from before, but just spice it up a bit. And I mean, the possibilities for this material are kind of endless. It works really well for like neon tubes, where you have an intense color in the closer you get to the edges, and well, like a pure white maybe in the middle. It looks kind of cool. Yeah, I don't really like the red. I think I'm just gonna stick to blue, turquoise. You know, the classic sci-fi colors. But seriously, anything sci-fi, just put in some teal and some orange, and you'll be good. All right, that looks kind of cool. And again, you can change between if you want to move in object mode or like in world space. There's a bug in Maya where if you I guess it's a feature that has a bug, but if you hold on Control and you move on an axis, you'll be constrained to 2 axes. So like here, I'll be moving up I'll be holding down Control and holding down the Y axis, so it'll lock the Y but allow me to move in Z and X. But if you're in object mode while you do this, it sort of funkily snaps around, so be careful with that. But it's really practical, so you can like constrain it to 2 axes, which is really nice. And the cool thing about the V-Ray light material is that you can actually use it as a light, but it's really render heavy. So I'll fake it with a V-Ray sphere light, sort of just encompass the entire object in the sphere light, and give it the color of my object, kind of this blue-green color. Because like the sphere lights render a lot faster. And there you go. Silly me, forgot to turn on the invisibility. There you go. And I guess you can see a tiny bit of green down there, so let's just crank up the intensity. See more? A little more? Yeah, that's better, but I don't know, I don't like the green. It's kind of sick. Let's make it more blue. Yeah, I think that'll be better. Yeah, that's better. Up the subdivs. This will just produce less noise. It'll render slower, but less noise. And again, don't worry too much about specific values. It's like here, you know, it's just for like place it wherever it looks good and see what happens. And again, here I'm constraining it, holding down Control and moving on 2 axes, like there. Kind of looks like it has a face now, though. Let's just move this out of the way. Like the giant pillar in the middle is like the nose, and the floating rocks is kind of like its eyes. Oh, that's stupid. Okay, whatever, let's just go with it. Ah, it's better. That just kind of looks like a weird twisted face. I suppose that's alright. Yeah, okay, now you don't look at the face anymore. It's like when you get into that zone where you just see a face somewhere, you just can't unsee it. When here, like, you see the camera's kind of clipping. It's clipping my geometry, so I'm actually not getting the ground that I wanted. So I'm just going to delete some of the faces. Not too many of the faces. There we go. And again, that's fine because we don't have a moving camera, and it's just a still image, and again, whatever looks the best. So, and again, just reuse your assets, and it's way easier. Nah, it's too orange. So I'll try to face it away from the sun a little bit more, just to get a little more blue light, the blue light from the shadows, and it's still too bright. I guess we could do some interesting things because it has a quite interesting shape. So if you just find an angle that you like, well, that's kind of cool. It's kind of like this spike to it. It's just not a massive tangent there. That looks quite good. All right. So next sci-fi planet. This will be more like a Saturn kind of thing. So I'll start off with a ring. And I mean, I don't really have a plan for much of this stuff, so I just kind of roll with it. And I suggest you do the same. Just experiment, have fun with it. I guess that's what this tutorial is really about. I mean, it's you can totally follow along and put in the values that I put in, but I don't think you'll learn a lot from that. A cool thing with the deformers is that you can actually rotate them like this. Like I rotated 90 degrees and it gives me a completely different look. It's really like pizza planet kind of thing. Let's try to twist deformer, see what that looks like. That's okay-ish. Let's triangulate it, see what it looks like. Twist around. That's alright. Okay, planet time. Arbitrary values, harden the edges, transform components. And let's do a twist deformer. And again, like you can also rotate. Like I said, you could rotate the deformers to kind of get interesting effects. You get this interesting texture on the planet. Duplicate it. Move it into space. Let's see, where does it look good? Oh, that's cool. See, now we have this sort of a classic space picture. Like seriously, as soon as you put rings on a planet, it screams space. Saturn, you are the most awesome planet. Alright. I don't want this to be exactly the same color as the foreground planet because I want this to have a feel like it's further away. So I'll desaturate a little more. Move it further away. Because that's actually it's casting a shadow on the planet in the foreground, and which would be weird, seeing as it's supposed to be further away. So just try and make it not do that. Yeah, that looks cool. All right, I'm trying with the vignette. The Vray physical camera has a built-in vignette, and that looks quite cool as well. Just try to adjust the light a little bit, see if we can get this shape of the light that we want. And I want to put some more attention on the rocks there. So I'm going to lighten them up. I'm going to give them a separate material, lighten them up a bit, make it tiny bit reflective, just to make them stand out a little more from the foreground and the plane. And here is my again in one of the scripts that I have is an ambient occlusion material based on the Vray dirt. So it's a Vray extra text with a Vray dirt piped into it, and I'm going to need a self-illumination pass for the cube, and interestingly enough, I'm also going to need a normals pass. This is because the normals pass just looks way cool. It's just an awesome pass. And a depth pass. So we'll use this to create some depth fog with, to sort of push planets further away. So you can see up here I have these values. So if I select an object, you can see that it says distance from the camera, and you get this if you go up into display, and you can turn on object details. and this will tell you how far away your objects are from your camera, from the currently selected camera. So I'll use those values to like approximate what the C depth max value will be. And I'll just crank up my render settings now, just to get a crisper image, final resolution. And because no one wants to watch me render, I'm just gonna pause the video. But before that, I'll just show you the like normals pass, the illumination pass, and call it. And here we have it. Like, this is the final render. And what you want to do is you just want to save it out. I'm gonna save it as an EXR. I usually save it as an EXR for Nuke, but Photoshop will also take EXRs. And the cool thing about doing this is that you'll keep your like linear colors. Let's do that. Let's save it out. Boom. There we go. Alright, so now the fun begins. The other fun part, the Photoshop part. So what I did was I just opened all my files in Photoshop. And it's important when you open EXRs in Photoshop that you make sure that you check the use alpha channel instead of transparency. If you use the alpha channel, it'll, I don't know why, but the colors will be as you want them to. And then just copy paste from one document into the other, so you have them all collected into one. And then I'm going to change it to 8-bit, just because the filters, most filters will only work with 8-bit mode. So just gonna rename these layers so I know what they are. So we have my normals pass and my illumination pass, AO, and Z depth. The first thing we'll do is we'll put on some ambient occlusion and just set it to multiply. And because of the way my material is set up, I have to invert it. And I just adjust the opacity to get sort of close to what we want. And I usually copy my layers just as to keep a backup of it. And then we start erasing away, finding areas that don't need AO, like the far away planets and things like that. Next up is the normals pass, which I'm gonna set to lighten. Or soft light, looks better. That's what like this is about really, is just experimenting. Take the opacity down. You can see it sort of added this green and purple colors to the image, which gives it quite a nice feel. And time for a C depth pass. Again, I copied the layer just as a backup. You could do that with Control or Command J. And lighten works pretty good for that. Just the opacity. This is sort of distance some of the objects. And I don't know, it's really, again, it's sort of like a, how do you want this thing to feel? There's no like right or wrong thing. So I like to just introduce a little bit of blue into my C depth pass, just to give this sort of feel of like a hot day, you know, when things are receding into sort of like this like blue fog. And with the illumination pass, I'm gonna apply Gaussian blur to it. This is gonna serve as my glow for my cubes. So I apply a Gaussian blur and sort of flick through the layer styles, see what looks good. The opacity. You can really experiment as much as you want with this. It's really up to you. And Shift Command or Shift Control Alt E will merge all your layers into a new one. And I wanna pull down, because it's quite, there's not a lot of contrast in the image. at the moment. So I'm going in and adjusting the red, green, and the blue channels to my liking. This last one, the blue channel, where you like sort of you pull down the blue and you up it a little bit, you up the greens a little bit, just gives it this sort of retro feel, I think, which I think is quite nice for this image. I just want to get a bit more variation, like between the shadows and the lit parts. Move all these down. I keep them as like a backup, so I can always go back if I need one of the passes again. Yeah, I might want to push back the planet in the distance, like the far distance, a little more, just to make it really recede into space. But I don't really want to affect anything else in the image too much, so I'm actually just like with the AO pass, I'm gonna erase parts that I don't really want to be affected. Like the top of the mountains might be nice to have a little bit of that on. But really it's very, very minimal. And now it's the classic sort of chromatic aberration that's super popular and massively overdone sometimes. So if you pull the bottom two ones up all the way to 100 and just sort of leave the last one at the top one to default, you get this like red and blue fringe, and you really want to be conservative with it because you don't want it too much. You want to sort of make it add to the picture, but not so much that people really notice it. And again, some more vignetting, like the Vray one, I didn't feel like it was enough, so just adding a little more. Again, to like, this is basically just to frame it even better, and because I feel like a lot of the things, especially the stuff in the foreground, value-wise, is pretty close to the middle ground as well. So I want to pull that closer to the camera. Add some noise, not too much. Again, subtle stuff that people won't necessarily pick up on, but you can feel it. You can feel it in the image. I mean, you might want something more extreme, but I don't, not for this picture. And a really cool feature of CS6, I'm using Photoshop CS6, is these new types of blur modes. And for this one, I'm gonna use the iris blur. The cool thing about the iris blur is that it gives you blur effects similar to like what you would get with a camera. So you can achieve this like bokeh effect where you can see the blades of the aperture when you blur it, which is really cool. I'm not going to use that for this though. I just want some of the foreground elements to be blurred. But it's really good. You should really play around with the brightness and the values over to the right, because they can really produce some cool effects. Yeah, and I think that I don't want it too bright, but I want the brightness to sort of lead the eye to our weird little cube a little bit. So just add a tiny bit of glow. I'm gonna overdo it to begin with, just put in too much, because you can always take away, but just sort of adding a subtle glow to the edges of far away and very bright things just makes the picture blend together better, I think. As you can see, this is way too much now. But then I'll go in and I'll erase it afterwards, so that I get exactly the result that I want. Oh yeah, and the color picker I'm using, you can see the color pick in the right corner. It's called Coolerus. It's I think it's like $10, and it's if you want a really good color picker, you should definitely check it out. Just the opacity, just because right now it's ridiculous. And there we go. That is my stylized environment in Maya. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and thanks a lot for watching. Feel free to check out some of the other tutorials on our site, and I'll see you guys later. Thanks.